Coming to paperback and e-readers, Isis Legacy. The sorority secrets from the goddess next door are revealed in this all-new Isis series adventure. Pre-order your copy of Isis Legacy on Amazon.com today. One of my viewers wanted me to talk about why DC Comics consistently held back on creating black heroes and hindered efforts to make them stand out on their own. Now, today, DC Comics has quite a few black heroes like Mr. Terrific, Vixen, Steel, and Cyborg. However, back in the 1960s, there were no black heroes over at DC Comics, and one of the reasons why there were no black heroes over at DC Comics was because Editorial, as I see it, was possibly racist, and because those editors did not want to feature black heroes in their books. There was no black hero until 1977, when Black Lightning graced the pages of DC Comics in his own series. Now, your DC Comics could have easily had its first black superhero back in 1966, when Jim Shooter was writing Legion of Superheroes. Now, your Jim Shooter wanted the character of Ferro Lad to be revealed as a black character because your Ferro Lad wore a helmet, and what he wanted the Ferro Lad character to do was take his helmet off to reveal that he was a black teenager. However, this idea was shut down by DC's editor at the time, Mort Weisinger, because, as he says, he didn't want to lose Southern distribution. Now, I find that argument to be complete BS because in July of 1966, when Ferro Lad debuted, it was the same month and same year that Marvel debuted the Black Panther. Now, if your comics are distributed by distributors, I would think that the same if Marvel could go out here and distribute Black Panther on the same Southern shelves, DC would have had no problem getting Ferro Lad on the shelves. So that's why I would believe that your Mort Weisinger was possibly being racist at the time as related to the whole debut of Ferro Lad, because he wanted to go out here and he didn't want this black character on the shelves because he just didn't want a black character to be associated with his DC Comics. So that's why I believe your Ferro Lad was shut down by him. He just did not want to be held accountable for bringing out a black character as related to the DC brand, because if those same Southern distributors had no problem with Black Panther, they would have had no problem with Ferro Lad. So I see the problem here being a racist and out of touch editor who was scared of losing money on a black character and losing a lot of what he thought would be the support of comic fans. But if comic fans had no problem with Black Panther, they would have had no problem with Ferro Lad. Yes, I know that Jim Crow was still going on at the time in the late 60s as the civil rights movement was going on, but many of those young readers had a lot more progressive views than many of the racist parents that were out there, and they possibly would have supported that character. Unfortunately, DC Comics Editorial never gave that black character a chance in the marketplace. Now, DC Comics had another chance to create its first black superhero in 1969. Now, this black superhero would have debuted under the creative team of Len Wein and Marv Wolfman and Nick Cardy, and they could have created this black character who was named Joshua. Now, this Joshua character was wearing a mask, and he was trying to get the Titans to help him stop a group of black teens who were manipulated into committing crimes. Now, this black hero at the end of the book was supposed to take his mask off and reveal that he was black. However, your Carmine Infantino, who was editing Teen Titans at the time, was not happy with that whole idea. So he squelched the entire idea and then had Neil Adams redraw the final panels featuring the character as white and his brother as white, and then go out here and not even put that whole idea of a black hero on the pages of Teen Titans. Now, I would have to say that this was your Carmine Infantino possibly being racist, because he was angry about the whole issue of a black character being associated with the Teen Titans as a hero. Because I find it interesting that he had no problem with your Mal Duncan being a part with the Teen Titans, and your Mal Duncan was basically a guy with no powers at all. And while he was a very skilled boxer and good with his hands, with fighting, he didn't have powers or skills like Robin and Speedy, and he didn't really have powers like Kid Flash or Aqualad. So he was basically there to be, as I call it, the token black guy, and to just be there to say he was there for so-called representation, because we really didn't get much character development on Mal Duncan as a character if you compare Mal to Victor Stone, aka Cyborg. Now, there was a major problem for Carmine Infantino back in 1970, where your Mal Duncan was written to have been featured in a kiss with Teen Titans member Lilith. Now, Lilith is a white girl and Mal Duncan is black, and your Carmine Infantino objected, saying that the readership was not ready for an interracial kiss, and that issue would lead to hate mail. Now, I believe that in some ways your Carmine Infantino was being racist here, because he's sitting here not wanting us to see a heterosexual black man be out here and being seen as desirable. Now, this was an innocent kiss to say that Lilith was wishing him luck as related to him going into space as an astronaut, but many people like your Carmine Infantino and many others thought that this was something that would be interpreted as your Mal Duncan being some sort of sexually attractive. Now, many people in the comic book medium, I believe, especially some white comic fans, they have an issue with the whole idea of a black man being presented as somebody who can be sexually attractive. And them seeing a black man kissing a white woman is a problem for them, because they have an issue with black heterosexual masculinity. And this goes all the way back to the dark days of the antebellum South, where a lot of white racists had a problem with a black man because they feared about genetic annihilation, and they feared if white women were allowed to see a black man as sexually attractive, they feared they would not be chosen as partners for relationships. So that's where the roots of that racism come from, and that's why many in editorial at DC, I believe, did not want anybody to see your Mal Duncan as somebody who could be seen as attractive to the white girls who were on the Teen Titans at the time, Lilith and Donna Troy. So that's one of the issues I believe led to a lot of your Carmine Infantino's hesitancy as related to presenting Mal Duncan, because it's okay for Mal Duncan to be on the team and be the token black and be asexual, but once he starts to express himself in a sexualized fashion, that's when they started to have issues. And that's where once this issue was published, the book got a lot of hate mail, and it also got a death threat directed at Dick Giorgiano, the creator of Mal Duncan. Now, Mal Duncan was DC's first black hero, but basically he was a token, as I see it, because, again, he had no real powers, and he was just basically there to be in the representative spot as the black character. And while Mal Duncan has gone out here and put on some hand-me-down costumes like the Guardian, and sometimes shows up as the Hornblower or Vox, he really has not gotten all the good character development that Cyborg received back in the 80s. Now, Cyborg was a fully actualized character, and when you look at Marv Wolfman and George Perez and what they did with Cyborg, he was a full, rich, multidimensional character, whereas Mal Duncan was just basically there to just be the black guy who shows up, to say that the Teen Titans weren't racist. So that character he really suffered as a result. And while he was DC's quote unquote first black hero in some ways, he really was basically, again, just a token, and he was just there just to be there. So after that, we saw another black character debut in the pages of Legion of Superheroes back in 1975. And what they wanted to do with this character, Tyrok, was they wanted to go whitewash him, but somehow they managed to make him be in the books. Now, this Tyrok character, his story really shows the racism of DC Comics, and they show that this black character, Tyrok, is on a segregated island of black people, and they went out here and made just the most goofiest costume of all for him. Now, that was by design because the writer, Mike Grell, was really angry about the way they were going to do this character, and he saw that story that they had for him was absolutely insulting, because while they, again, had plans to create this black character, the whole story of a black character being on a segregated island of black people was offensive to Mike Grell. So Mike Grell put your Tyrok in one of the most ridiculous costumes to be ever made as a way to protest that story. Now, there was, as I see it, no way of really saving this story, because this story was an extremely racist one. And and me knowing that comic book jobs are very rare and hard to get, if I was Mike Grell at the time, I probably would have sandbagged it the exact same way in protest, because it's a major insult to go out here and present a story with a black character, and then you're going to say he's stuck in a segregated world. And again, the Legion of Superheroes, as Jim Shooter originally envisioned it, was supposed to be a progressive world where people were judged based on the content of their character, and you had heroes from multiple worlds going out here and fighting for Superman's mission of truth and justice. So this whole editorial, ironically, again, shows how racist they are, and how they counter many of the missions of their heroes, like Superman and the Legion of Superheroes, because Superman inspired the Legion of Superheroes, and as the inspiration of the Legion of Superheroes, he wanted all peoples to go out here and do what was right. So when I look at the racism behind the scenes, it's really an interesting contrast to what was presented in the pages of those DC comics. And again, there was no way, as I see it, to make Tyrok look like a cool character if you're going to have him in a segregated story. So it's basically, again, you're promoting these Jim Crow ideas in a so-called progressive future, and there's only one way to protest that, and that is by trying to, again, go out here and sandbag that story, because that story is an insult to black people. And that really, again, showed back in 1977 with Black Lightning, because originally, before we got the Black Lightning character, we got the whole idea of this so-called Black Bomber who they wanted to propose, who was a white racist who would transform into a black man. Now, if that doesn't show how out of touch your DC editorial is, I don't know what would show you how out of touch they truly were at the time. The whole idea of a white racist turning into a black man is just absolutely insulting, and had this Black Bomber concept gone to market, DC would probably have lost its entire editorial team, and it would have they would have cleaned house over there, because the whole Black Bomber concept, a white racist turning into a black man, it just shows how out of touch your editorial is at DC at the time. And this was not a black character that you would want on the pages of your comic, when you had Marvel Comics at the time with Storm out here, Luke Cage, Blade, and they had Black Panther and Falcon. So Marvel had 5 black superheroes as part of its brand, but DC was all they had at the time was token Mal Duncan, who was fading from the pages of Teen Titans, and we had your Black Lightning, and it shows how completely out of touch your DC Comics was from the 60s to the 70s, and how they practically missed out on an opportunity to make a lot of money from black comic readers who would have definitely picked up more characters if DC Comics had the courage to go out here and actually put black heroes in the pages of their comics. Now, if they had some courage and some backbone and some stones, we could have seen more black heroes in the pages of their books. But the whole thing is, many of the people in editorial, they were either, again, as I see it, some were racist, like I believe Mort Weisinger and Carmine Infantino were, or they were scared of losing money. But the whole thing is that they really didn't want to go out here and put those characters in the pages of their books, and that really showed how they just really viewed black people. I mean, the black audience was one of the biggest growing audiences in the late 60s and early 70s, and I find it interesting that DC Comics was hesitant to capitalize on that audience, but we had Hollywood movie studios going out here and creating lots of blaxploitation heroes on the movie screen. At the same time, DC was hesitant to put a black hero in the pages of their comics. We had Hollywood, which was going out here practically releasing blaxploitation movies in large numbers because they were losing money at the time. And again, that's very ironic because Hollywood, when they were losing money at the time, they went out here and tried to reach the black audience with blaxploitation movies, but DC Comics was afraid of losing Southern distribution. So that shows me again how the racism, it was a major part of DC Comics, because if Hollywood could go out here and try to go after the black audience, then what was stopping DC Comics from going after that black audience that was out there? Again, another critical question I would love to ask, because the audience was clearly there looking for product, and there were many black people at the time who were desperate for media featuring their image. And that's why John H. Johnson's Ebony, Jet, Hue, and Tam were very popular magazines, and they got Southern distribution. So when I look at Mort Weisinger's argument, it falls apart, because those Ebony, Jet, Hue, and Tan magazines were sold in the same drugstores as your DC Comics and Marvel Comics. So Ferro Lad could easily have been a black hero, and there be no problem. And you could have debuted that hero back in 1966 and not had a problem at all. But because racist editors were afraid of alienating white racists, who were a small audience, not a huge one, because DC Comics at the time were selling in the hundreds of thousands, they could have easily put this black hero in the pages of their books. But racists, because they are afraid of alienating other races, made it where DC Comics didn't put that black hero on the pages of their books. But when I look at this whole situation with DC Comics and their hesitancy to create black heroes on their platform, this is why we need to create our own platforms and distribute our own heroes on those platforms. And that's why I thank God I'm in this era right now where we have this print-on-demand technology, and people can go out here and publish their own comic books. In this era, we can go out here and make our own characters stand out, and we don't need to worry about what other white-owned publishing companies produce on their platforms. If they won't produce a black hero that we like, we can go out here and produce our own hero and tell our own stories, like I'm doing right now with Esteem No Good Deed, and what I'm doing right now with John Haynes at Death's Door. So we can go out here and create our own stories, and that's what many independent comic creators like myself are doing. We are going out here creating our own characters and making them stand out on our own, because any comic that's created by a white person is only them seeing us through their lens. But when we create our own stories, we see ourselves as we truly are. And we can present who we are to the world in the pages of our own comics. And that is one of the things that is great about this 21st century era. We don't have to go out here and wait for somebody to tell us it's not the right time. We can make it our time, the same way I'm doing here on the SJS Direct imprint, and many others are doing out here right now, like Concrete Comics, and guys like Raymond Leonard with his Agent Solo book, and Black Sands is doing right now. We're seeing a whole lot of diversity of the Black experience in the pages of comics these days, and it's basically a golden age for independent Black creators. And because it's a golden age, we no longer have to worry about companies like DC Comics holding us back, and DC Comics going out here and being afraid of Black characters, because we can make our own Black characters, and we can make our own Black characters better than these hand-me-down heroes, token diversity hires, or these affirmative action capes that they have out here. We can tell much better stories, and I've seen much better stories from independent Black creators out here, and I would rather get behind those independent Black creators in creating fully fashioned Black characters that show us the richest and most diverse picture of the Black experience, rather than seeing a bunch of tokens and hand-me-downs who live for white acceptance, white approval, and white validation. And that when I look at today's comic book world, again, I am just, thank God that I'm a part of it, because I could not think of being a part of a world where the only Black heroes we see are the ones that are tokens, and it's a whole lot of hesitancy just to get those kind of heroes to the marketplace. Now, my first comic, Esteem No Good Deed, is now available on Kindle for 99 cents, and you can pick that up on Amazon.com. And my upcoming comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, will be available soon. We're up to the 30th page of the art, and only 2 more pages to go and to cover, and I'm hoping to have that Kickstarter up soon. So if you want to get some of my action-packed African-American fantasy fiction, like the ISIS series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, and the books of the Smith-Thriller trilogy, you can find all those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them on Smashwords, the iBook Store, and Google Play. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Taking Care of Business. The man who rules the world breaks in a brand new partner to help him take care of business in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get John Haynes, Taking Care of Business at paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere.